I mean, you gotta communicate, right? You're an offensive coordinator. You gotta communicate. Good morning to you. Good Wednesday morning. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports. This is Daily Shot of Steelers. It comes your way bright and early every weekday. If you're into hockey and or baseball, I also offer daily shots of Penguins and Pirates in the same place that you found this. The second week of OTAs, for however long those last, if you heard yesterday's news, took place yesterday on the South Side, offering yet another opportunity for Arthur Smith to put his own fingerprints on this offense. Funny thing about that, though, is he'll be putting fingerprints where there really weren't many at all. Ever tell you guys the story about Matt Canada's office down the hall? Okay, picture a hall, all right? Any hall, but make it a long one. And now picture an offensive coordinator who's supposed to be overseeing not just the offense conceptually, but the people who make the offense go, just sitting down there by himself, all hours of the day, all hours of the night, but again, pretty much by himself. And then, on those occasions when he had to go on the field, as part of practice, he would just kind of stand in the back, arms folded, head under that straw hat, not saying much of anything, looking through those shades. What was he thinking? Who knew? What did he want everybody to be doing? Who knew? Players didn't know. They've told me that. Other coaches didn't know. Even they've found a way to acknowledge this. And along comes Smith. And if you'll remember, the week before OTA started, I had mentioned on this show that one of the things I was most eager to see in one direction or the other was how Smith would carry himself in this context. And my goodness, has that ever been a positive? Right off the bat, didn't have to go digging for it, looking for it. You could see his hands, not just his eyes, his hands were everywhere. He was getting in right behind people saying, here, 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 no, do this, no, do that. It almost looked at first blush like he was the one who was out of line because it's been so long since we've seen a coordinator behave that way. Even after the practices are over, Smith is in the locker room. I don't know that I can count on one hand over a span of 3 years that I saw Canada in the locker room. Certainly not after a practice. He might be in there because he had to pass through during a game to get to wherever it is in a visiting stadium that the coaches were housed. But passing through the locker room on the South Side after a practice, I'm sure it must have happened. I'm sure that I don't recall any such scene. Smith went through the other day looking for Russell Wilson, sat with him for a while, talked with him, got up and walked back across. And as he did, he and I exchanged a few words, informal stuff, little stuff about the offense, not a big deal. And he spoke back with some encouraging words about the personality of his players and how he feels they'll be a good fit. But again, that never happened. That never happened with Canada. Now, the least of your concerns should ever be whether or not people talk to me. But talking to the franchise quarterback, yeah, you might want to take care of that. Also and related, remember all those times that Najee Harris would pipe up about accountability and how things aren't being followed up on? Well, he was talking about Canada, okay? I think everybody would have figured that out, but just in case they didn't, he was talking about Canada. Listen to Isaac Seumalo on this subject yesterday as it relates to Smith.
Yeah, I just think he's, made everybody super accountable, which, I think starts with the players, but it's good to have it from the coaches as well. I think he's been consistent in his message. He wants guys to, take each day as it comes. Be a pro and have to come in with an attitude of like, what can I do today to improve myself and help my teammates, and, get this thing going towards, week one and training camp.
Accountable. Did you hear that part? Accountable. He also acknowledged, Isaac did, and the veteran players will usually do this, that the players ultimately have to be the one that police that up close. They're the only ones that are in the room, in the other environments. But as you heard Isaac further say, it sure is nice when the coaches are on board with you. So if you think back, now I don't want to keep turning this into a Canada bashing session. For one, it's too easy, and for another, it's kind of boring after a time. But if you think back to all those times that you saw the offense doing things that were visibly, noticeably undisciplined or disorganized, and you were wondering, where does that come from? And you might have been blaming Canada. You might have been blaming Mike Tomlin. You might have been blaming the individual players, depending on who it was. Well, regardless of where the finger was pointing, it now points in the same direction. Everybody that I'm speaking with cites Arthur Smith. Nobody else when it comes to the offense, when it comes to being responsible for the offense, when it comes to being responsible for the discipline, the behavior, the conduct of the offense. And I've been telling you also this for a long time. In Tomlin's dream scenario, he has an offensive coordinator who basically functions as his own head coach. Tomlin would prefer to focus on the defense at all times. He would prefer to be a head coach / defensive coordinator, to not have to worry at all about the offense, which, by the way, was one of the things that Tomlin liked about Canada, was that he saw Canada as at least being able to just go down the hall and leave me alone. When we come back, J1Q.
This segment of Daily Shot is brought to you by our good friends at Mike's Beer Bar. They're located on Federal Street, directly across from PNC Park. Mike has more than 500 beers on tap, including from more than 50 local breweries. Stop in and say hello. Tell Mike we sent you. Mike's Beer Bar.
Today's J1Q comes from Chris, who says, DK, we got an offensive coordinator who the Falcons didn't want as head coach anymore. The Falcons. I don't know why we didn't get someone at coordinator who didn't just get fired. The response that I have to that is something that you brought up yourself. You said, as head coach, an offensive coordinator who the Falcons didn't want as head coach anymore. They didn't. Arthur Blank specifically didn't want him. Arthur Blank had put in place a goal in Atlanta where through 3 years, the Falcons were going to have to be at such and such level from a purely wins and losses standpoint. And when they weren't there, and they weren't, he made the change. That was it. That was it. If you looked at the press release, and I remember this when this came out before Smith was even a gleam in the Steelers' eye, being struck by how Atlanta management put out this glowing statement about Smith and what an awesome this and that and how grateful they were for his time and everything else. And also, you're fired. So I didn't get the sense that he left there on bad terms. I certainly didn't get the sense that he left there in a way that Atlanta regretted having him or anything to that effect. It's just that when you're a head coach, most places, you either win or you lose. And the Falcons lost. They continued losing. It's kind of what they do, with rare exceptions, which is also why you say the Falcons the way you did. So if you don't want to get someone who was just fired, Chris, who do you want to get? Because if they have a job, they're not coming to you. Or if they have a job and they would see coming to you as a promotion, then chances are they would not have NFL coordinating experience. In other words, one of these, and I know that these names get people excited, but so-and-so is a product of the San Francisco system, and they're coming up the ranks, and they're really gonna be the next big thing and whatever. That gets people excited. But that's also a person who's never been a coordinator, not to mention who's never had to manage people. The first segment of this very program today was all about Smith's impact, potentially, but just as of right now, it's, OTAs. Impact as a leader. Impact as a guy who's to be taken seriously, who's to be hated, who's to be, feared a little bit. That's okay. That's okay. So you can get excited about San Francisco, Joe Whiz Kid assistant, but that kid never had to be the head coach of an NFL team. And that kid wouldn't have a micro fraction of the experience that Smith would in that regard. In fact, I'll bet if you canvass the league, all 32 franchises, you're not going to find a ton of coordinators, offensive coordinators, who've been NFL head coaches. It might be a strength. It might be something that you want, especially with a defensive guy as your own head coach, and those are rare. My stance on the Smith hire has not wavered in the slightest from the day that it was made to what I'm seeing from him right now to what I'm hearing from him right now. Doesn't mean a thing, at least not much. He's got to win games. He's got to score points. He's got to find the end zone on a consistent basis. And I'm talking a minimum of 3 or 4 times per game for any of this to matter. But to where we are right now, yeah, I like this. I like it a lot. Couldn't care less what the Falcons thought of him as a head coach. I appreciate the question. I appreciate everybody listening to Daily Shot of Steelers. We're going to do another one of these tomorrow.